It was just another Wednesday. I remember that part vividly, because the sky was clear, the air smelled like fresh-cut grass, and for the first time in weeks, I'd finally gotten up early enough to beat the garbage truck. The kind of morning that whispers routine, calm, until I stepped onto my driveway and saw nothing. My truck, gone. At first I froze, stared at the empty patch of concrete like maybe I was still dreaming. Then came the rush of panic. I turned in a circle, scanned the street, checked the garage, the curb, everywhere, but it wasn't there. My legs carried me down the driveway before my mind caught up, heart pounding like it hadn't since Afghanistan. Had it been stolen? Then I saw it. A cream-colored notice taped, of all places, to my mailbox. The signature font of the Willow Creek HOA. Slanted, severe, and always passive-aggressive. Vehicle violation, non-compliant appearance, towed at owner's expense. That's when the blood drained from my face. Because this wasn't just any vehicle. This was my late grandfather's military service truck. A 1951 Dodge M37, olive drab and pristine, handed down like an heirloom through 3 generations of veterans. It still had the placard in the front window. National Historic Vehicle, registered by the U.S. Military Museum. That truck had survived more than I ever would, and the HOA treated it like a rusted-out Civic dumped on cinder blocks. I stormed back inside, nearly knocking over the umbrella stand. My wife saw the paper and didn't even ask. She knew that face. Rage, disbelief, grief. All tangled up in a man who had just been robbed by a piece of paper. I called the HOA number on the notice. Voicemail. Due to high call volumes, your concern may be addressed at the next general meeting. The next general meeting. Not even an apology. No warning, no courtesy. Just another fine wrapped in official ink. By noon, I was at the impound lot. It sat on the outskirts of town. Chain-link fence, busted neon sign, the kind of place that smelled like burnt oil and bureaucracy. The truck was parked between a silver minivan and a dented Honda. Orange tape stretched across its hood with the word "Abandoned" scrawled in Sharpie. I stood in front of it like I was staring at a coffin. Inside the office, a woman in a hoodie didn't look up from her phone. $670 for towing and storage, she mumbled. I slid the military placard across the counter like a badge. She finally blinked. Read it. Her face shifted. You'll have to take it up with whoever called it in, she said. You mean the HOA? A slow nod. I paid the fee. Because it wasn't about the money. It was about getting that truck back where it belonged. In my driveway. In my family. But as I drove it home, every rattle in the engine felt like a scar. Not just from time or terrain, but from the shame of being disrespected. My grandfather had served his country with honor. And this was how his legacy got treated? Number. That night, I went to the closet and pulled out the box. Letters, medals, registry documents, and the original certification from the museum. The M37 wasn't just a family keepsake. It was protected by federal historical preservation law, and the HOA had towed it like trash. I looked up the HOA president, Leonard McDowell, retired accountant, no military background, no empathy. The kind of man who once tried to ban Halloween decorations because they were visually jarring. The same man who just erased a piece of my family's history like it was an oil stain on a driveway. I didn't sleep that night. I wrote. To the U.S. Military Museum. To the local news. To the veterans of foreign wars. Chapter the one volunteered at on weekends. I submitted a formal complaint to the State Historic Preservation Office. I even pulled up the bylaws of our HOA and found nothing about aesthetic compliance applying to registered historical vehicles. Leonard had crossed a line, and for once I wasn't going to write a polite letter. I was going to make noise. Because the truck may have been towed, but Leonard had just started a war he couldn't win. The next morning, I made one phone call. It rang twice before I heard that familiar gravel voice. Dave? You calling this early means someone either died or pissed you off. Lieutenant Mason, I said. They towed the M37. Silence. Then, sharp and deliberate. "You've got to be kidding me." I wasn't. I told him everything. The HOA, the fine, the impound lot, the sticker they slapped across the hood like it was a clunker. "You still got the museum registration?" he asked. "Framed in my office," I said. "Why?" "Because what they did wasn't just stupid. It was unlawful. You're not just the owner of a truck. You're the custodian of a federal artifact. I'm calling the state press liaison." By 6 p.m. that evening, it was on the news. The headline hit harder than I expected. "Veterans' historic military vehicle towed by HOA. Community erupts." The footage showed me standing next to the truck, placard in full view, flag fluttering in the background. The reporter asked, "Is this what honoring our veterans looks like?" I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The story exploded. First local, then regional. Emails started pouring in. Neighbors, veterans, strangers from 3 states over. And that's when something shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. A woman named Julia from 3 blocks down emailed me a photo. Her front garden, dozens of small ceramic gnomes. Captioned, "Fine $75 for being culturally inconsistent." Then Mike from across the cul-de-sac sent a screenshot of his violation. "Fence too white. Must repaint in neutral HOA-approved beige." The HOA wasn't protecting the neighborhood. They were scrubbing it, sanitizing it. One truck, one gnome, one soul at a time. I met up with Rick that night. He's ex-law enforcement, exasperated, and retired, basically a landmine wrapped in flannel. He stood next to my truck and shook his head. "I remember when Leonard was just the guy who measured mailboxes with a ruler," he said. "Now he's running the neighborhood like it's a gated dictatorship." "Let's take him down," I said. Rick smiled. "Oh, I was hoping you'd say that." We weren't just going to protest. We were going to investigate. First stop? HOA financial reports. Now, technically, any HOA member can request to view spending breakdowns, but they make it intentionally hard. Paper forms, outdated passwords, weird pickup hours. Fortunately, Rick still had his login from when he ran security cameras 6 years ago. What we found? $18,000 in community beautification last quarter. But no new flowers, no new signage, just Leonard's newly paved driveway and the suspiciously pristine landscaping around his mailbox. We pulled the property files. His renovations were recent, but there were no permits filed with the city. Leonard had been using HOA funds for personal upgrades. That was the crack in the dam. I emailed Rachel next. She's 2 doors down, works in zoning compliance at City Hall. Within hours, she sent a zoning map back with 1 block outlined in red, Leonard's house. "No permit filed for the solar panels," she wrote. "But he fined my cousin for installing the same thing." Hypocrisy? Check. Fraud? Likely. Abuse of power? Absolutely. And then came the final blow. An email from Eric Beltran, the military museum historian. He'd seen the news segment. "We've reviewed your vehicle's registry and documentation. The HOA's actions qualify as unlawful seizure of a federal artifact. We are preparing a public statement of support. Let us know if you'd like to proceed with legal escalation." Legal escalation. Those words tasted like justice. Rick, Rachel, and I gathered in my garage. We set up a folding table, sticky notes, a whiteboard. It looked like a low-budget crime drama war room. But it was ours. We weren't just going to expose Leonard. We were going to dismantle the system he'd built, piece by piece, fine by fine, neighbor by neighbor, and we were going to do it the same way he tried to control us, with paperwork. Only this time, ours would be real. It started with a clipboard. Rick stood at the end of Willow's Circle that Saturday morning with a fresh cup of coffee in one hand and a petition in the other. Handwritten across the top in big, bold Sharpie. "Call for emergency election. Leonard must go." He didn't say a word at first, just stood there, smiling as neighbors walked by. Some ignored him. Some nodded politely. But by noon, he had 37 signatures. By sundown, over 70. We only needed 55. Leonard, of course, tried to shut it down before it began. Sunday morning, we woke to printed flyers on every doorstep, tucked inside those clear plastic bags that always seem a little too official. Beware misinformation. Your HOA is functioning legally and with full support of city ordinance. It was the kind of fear-pasted language only someone with too much to lose would use. It reeked of desperation. We countered with truth. Rick posted the documents, the bogus invoices, the missing permits. Rachel created a timeline, photos, receipts, violation dates, all of it tied to Leonard's actions. We added QR codes to them and taped them onto light poles, utility boxes, community boards. They weren't flyers. They were evidence. The turning point came on Monday night. We hosted a town hall in my garage. We called it Neighborhood Truth Night. Folding chairs, a white bedsheet as a projector screen, fresh cookies. It felt like church and courtroom rolled into one. Dave stood first. He'd been quiet through most of it, a quiet guy in flannel who used to be in city procurement. But when he spoke, you could feel the weight in the room shift. Leonard has spent HOA funds without board approval, he said, holding up a single printed invoice for landscaping services. This address isn't a public space. It's his front yard. And this invoice wasn't reviewed, discussed, or voted on. The room got quiet. Then Julia stood. I was fined for having ceramic gnomes. Mike followed. They threatened me with legal action for painting my shutters. Even old Mr. Redmond wheeled himself forward and said, "They told me my wheelchair ramp was unsightly. I built that with my own hands after my stroke." It was no longer one man's crusade. It was a reckoning. People stayed long after the meeting ended. They stood outside, on lawns and sidewalks, swapping stories, pulling up emails, showing photos of absurd violation letters. For the first time in years, we weren't isolated by fear. We were bound by frustration and purpose. Tuesday morning, we submitted the petition. The city clerk, a woman named Valerie with steel gray hair and an eyebrow piercing, reviewed it line by line. "You've exceeded the required signatures," she said. "This qualifies under Section 12-D. Emergency HOA election can be held within 10 days. We scheduled it for the following Thursday. Leonard tried to stall again. He called an informational session for the same night, printed another batch of glossy mailers calling our efforts unfounded attacks on dedicated leadership. But the neighborhood didn't buy it anymore. The words sounded hollow. The gloss couldn't cover the rot. Then, 3 days before the vote, Marla showed up at my door. She'd been on the HOA board since Leonard took over, always quiet, always compliant. But now, her hands were trembling, clutching a folder. Inside, internal emails. Instructions from Leonard, typed in capital letters. No need for board vote. Execute discretionary TOW. Bill HOA for landscaping. All communication to be verbal only. She looked at me, eyes glistening. I didn't know how deep it was until I saw the invoice for the towing. That truck. It wasn't just a violation. It was a symbol. I nodded. Are you willing to go public? She hesitated. Then, yes. That night, we posted her statement anonymously in the neighborhood group. It hit harder than anything we'd shared so far. Not because it was scandalous, but because it came from inside. Inside Leonard's kingdom. Inside the walls he'd built with intimidation, silence, and bureaucracy. He didn't know it yet, but his rule was over. Because truth? It spreads faster than control. And with one signature at a time, we were building something stronger than fear. Election day wasn't supposed to feel like war, but by the time the sun rose on Thursday, Willow Circle looked more like a political battleground than a sleepy suburban neighborhood. Handwritten signs staked into lawns, people standing with coffee cups and clipboards, kids handing out vote for change stickers made from old label paper. At 7 a.m., the line outside the community clubhouse was already 30 people deep. I wore my grandfather's jacket, the one he left me with the M37, a silent reminder of why this mattered. Rick had the results software ready. Marla stood by the door with a calm, almost defiant smile. And Dave? Dave stood in the corner with his arms crossed, watching everything, steady as ever. Leonard arrived at 7:42. He wore a pressed navy blazer, and that smug expression he always did when he thought he still had control. His wife trailed behind him, holding a stack of last-minute flyers that read, "Experience, leadership, vision." It might have meant something, if we hadn't all lived through what that vision really looked like. He walked through the crowd like a politician, but this time, no one made room. No one smiled. No one thanked him. At 8 o'clock sharp, voting began. The rules were clear. All residents in good standing could vote. 1 ballot per household. Proof of residency required. And we had volunteers at every checkpoint. The clubhouse buzzed like a courtroom. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years were swapping stories in line. One woman clutched a violation notice for her daughter's lemonade stand. A man behind her said, "He fined me for painting my porch a different shade of beige, said it was aggressively cheerful." The hours ticked by. At noon, someone brought donuts. By 3 p.m., the vote count passed 120. At 5:15, Valerie from the city clerk's office arrived with a portable scanner and an envelope labeled Certified Oversight Packet. She wasn't there for drama. She was there to make sure no one could say this wasn't real. At 6 p.m., the voting closed. Dave took the microphone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He just read the results like someone reading the final chapter of a long, painful book. For the position of HOA president, Leonard Crestwood, 28 votes. David Whitman, 109 votes. The room didn't cheer right away. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then someone clapped. Just once. Then again. Then it spread like thunder across the floor. People stood. Hugged. Rick wiped his eyes. Julia from 2 doors down whispered, "We did it." And outside, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, someone raised a small American flag in their yard. It wasn't planned. It just felt right. Leonard didn't speak. He stood motionless at the back of the room, his mouth slightly open, as if the math hadn't caught up to his ego. Then he turned, quietly, and walked out the door. No speech. No farewell. No eye contact. The next day, a for sale sign appeared on his lawn. But we weren't celebrating a dethroned king. We were celebrating each other. Marla was elected treasurer. Rachel joined the ethics committee we'd just created. And me? They named me historical advisor, mostly ceremonial, but I knew what it meant. It meant you reminded us who we are. That weekend we held our first new board meeting, not in a stuffy clubhouse with laminated agendas, but under the oak tree in Dave's backyard. Folding chairs, a whiteboard with the words HOA equals honesty, openness, accountability. People brought cookies. Someone brought a cooler of lemonade. And for the first time in years, no one whispered. No one looked over their shoulder. We talked. We laughed. We planned. Because this wasn't the end of something broken. It was the beginning of something better. And as I walked home that night under the soft glow of porch lights, not surveillance lights, I looked at the M37 parked in my driveway and thought, we didn't just win back our neighborhood. We remembered why it mattered in the first place. It started with a shadow. Not a metaphorical one. A real one. Caught on Rick's newly installed driveway camera at 3:14 a.m. A figure in a hoodie. Small building. Gloves. Moving with precision. At first, we thought it was just a kid. Maybe someone stealing packages. But then the footage showed her turning toward the fuse box on Dave's house. She didn't try the door. She reached underneath, pulled out a key from a hidden magnetic box only a few of us knew about, and let herself in. 10 seconds later, the porch light blinked. Then the motion light above his garage surged on, even though it had been disconnected since last month. Rick called me the second he saw it. "She's back," he said. "Karen, and she's not done." We didn't panic. We documented. Rick, Dave, and I stayed up the next night with thermoses of coffee and a plan. If she came back, we'd catch her. Not with confrontation, but with proof. And she did come back. At 2:41 a.m., the camera caught her again, this time scaling the fence at the Hendersons' vacant home. She moved like she'd rehearsed it, like she'd done it before. She carried a bag. Wires peeked out from the top. By morning, we found what she left behind. A new box, bolted under the eaves just like the old ones. Except this time the casing was matte black. No serial, no logo. Nothing but a blinking red dot. She wasn't just watching. She was rebuilding her system. And this time, she was doing it without permission, without board approval, without anyone's knowledge. We traced 6 more across the neighborhood. All recently installed. All tucked under gutters, mounted to fuse panels, or hidden behind utility covers. And each one had a faint signature etched into the metal. SWH, Safe Haven Wireless. Karen's family company. She was operating her own surveillance program. Independently. Illegally. We brought the evidence to the new board. Dave called an emergency meeting. Not one of those fake HOA sessions Karen used to hold in her kitchen. This was public, formal, documented. We projected the camera footage, the timestamps, the locations of the boxes, and finally, her face. The moment she looked directly into Rick's lens, hoodie slipping for a fraction of a second, revealing exactly who it was. No one in the room argued. No one needed to. But Marla raised a question that made the whole room go still. How does she still have the keys? We hadn't thought of that. But the answer became obvious once we checked the storage shed behind the clubhouse, the one where Karen used to keep board records and supplies. The spare keys were gone. All of them. She had taken them before stepping down. Before Leonard's downfall. Before the reform. She had never really let go. She had been planning this for months. Maybe years. The next morning, I woke up to an envelope on my doorstep. No name. Just a quote typed in bold. Order protects us from ourselves. Without it, you'll eat each other alive. Inside was a single photo. A shot of my wife at the community garden. Zoomed in, cropped, private, and chilling. It wasn't a threat. It was a message. She wanted us to know, I still see you. That evening we met at Rick's. Dave brought printed logs from the city infrastructure database, times when Karen had logged noise complaints using a fake email. WatchtowerHOA@gmail.com. Rick had mapped the network range of the new devices. And I brought the final piece. A flash drive. Inside, a backup of Karen's private safe haven portal, courtesy of a city employee who'd been quietly watching all of this unfold. The dashboard had it all. Home addresses, device statuses, a section labeled behavioral flags. She was assigning us risk scores. Like we were prisoners. Like we were threats. All from behind the curtain. And she hadn't done it alone. There were still names in her system we didn't recognize. Aliases? Old board members? People in the neighborhood still loyal to her? We didn't know yet. But we knew this. She was back. And this time? She wasn't trying to control the HOA. She was trying to become the HOA. From the shadows. Silently. Systematically. But we weren't the same people anymore. We weren't afraid of her notes or her rules or her blinking red dots. We had pulled back the curtain once before. And we were ready to do it again. Only this time, we wouldn't just take her down. We'd dismantle everything she'd built. Brick by brick. Light by light. Neighbor by neighbor. And we'd do it not with fear, but with truth. The portal wasn't locked anymore. Thanks to Rick's nephew, a cybersecurity intern with way too much free time, we now had full admin access to Karen's safe haven system. And what we found wasn't just shocking. It was damning. The network stretched beyond our neighborhood. 2 other communities. 8 beta test addresses. Over 30 devices. All reporting back to a single server hosted under a dummy LLC registered in Nevada. Karen hadn't just invaded our privacy. She was building a product. A surveillance-as-a-service platform disguised as HOA improvement. And we were the guinea pigs. Every motion light, a data point. Every flagged behavioral anomaly, a profile. We printed screenshots, server logs, DNS traces, even the invoice trail. Karen was funneling HOA funds to pay for bandwidth. It wasn't just about power anymore. It was about profit. We brought the evidence straight to Janice at the city office. She didn't flinch, just picked up the phone and called the district attorney. That afternoon, Karen's house was served. 3 plainclothes agents stepped out of a silver SUV. Calm. Efficient. One held a federal warrant. They didn't knock. They walked straight in. I stood across the street as they emerged 20 minutes later with 2 large bins marked evidence. One carried a small black server tower. The other, binders, labeled by street name. Our street. Our names. Karen wasn't home when they arrived, but she was brought in later that night. The charges? Wire fraud, unlawful surveillance, misuse of HOA funds, and possibly identity theft, pending confirmation on the fake board members used to greenlight her vendor contracts. But even before her court date, her empire collapsed. Marla held an emergency town hall in the clubhouse. Not a meeting. A cleansing. People brought the old warnings Karen had taped to their doors, the fake citations, the photos from motion lights, even the plastic casing from the devices she'd secretly installed. We put them all in a bin. Dave rolled it to the center of the room and lit it on fire, a symbolic burn, not to erase history, but to reclaim it. Neighbors clapped, some cried, others simply stood still, as if waiting for some ghost to pass through them. It was over. For real this time. The HOA charter was rewritten that week. Every future board decision would require full vote transparency, with real-time publication online. No more hidden motions. No more shadow vendors. And, most importantly, no individual could authorize any form of surveillance without signed consent from every single homeowner on the street. We also added a new clause. Any resident found guilty of using HOA infrastructure for personal financial gain shall be permanently barred from leadership positions and referred for civic sanction. They called it Karen's Law. We called it freedom. Weeks passed. The air felt lighter. Kids' chalk drawings returned to sidewalks. Sunflowers sprouted again in front yards once called visually distracting. Someone even brought back the gnome parade. But the most powerful moment? The day Dave climbed a ladder and replaced the last motion sensor light. Not with another camera. With a wind chime. Simple. Brass. Gentle. And when the wind picked up, it didn't blink, it didn't record, it sang. I stood in my driveway and smiled. Not because we'd won, but because we remembered who we were. We were never just residents. We were neighbors. We were people. We were the ones who rebuilt our street with garden tools, late-night meetings, and ridiculous lawn signs. And Karen? Her house sold quietly to a young couple who planted ivy and never asked for rule books. No notes were left. No bylaws were printed. Just one handwritten sign staked into their grass. We believe in kindness. Knock if you need sugar. That night, I reopened my little free library. Fresh paint. Solar lights. A new guest book inside with the words carved on the first page. For anyone who forgot what it feels like to belong. And inside the first donated book, a copy of Charlotte's Web. With a note that read, "Sometimes it just takes one voice. Thanks for being ours." I closed the door gently, looked up at the sky, and for the first time in a very long time, there were no cameras, no red lights blinking in the dark, just stars, and a street full of stories still waiting to be told. Because this wasn't the end of the road. This was just the beginning of a neighborhood. Finally, free.